Hi, everybody. Uh, I'm hoping, I'm hoping that my microphone is coming through on this right here. So I hope that's okay. So it's good to see you guys jumping in here very shortly into the live feed for today's office hour. Excuse me, office hours for Wednesday, June 26th. I am Shannon Hernandez. I go by the Shan Man. I'm a radio disc jockey. And of course, we're here to really just answer questions for podcasters. I know there's a number of podcasters that are out there who have already started their program and they have they're either reaching a plateau or they're looking for other ways or other means to create a better podcast. And so my idea was to create something where I could hopefully answer those questions and utilize the 20 years of my radio experience and kind of fold them all into my podcasting experience as well. So that's what we are here for. So what I'm going to ask for you to do is if you are just joining in right now on the live feed, there is a chat that should be over here on your right hand side, and I want you to go ahead and I want you to let me know where you are chatting from and what your podcast is all about. And if you have a question, do me a favor. When you scroll down on this particular page, there should be a link on this page. Let me see. Oops, hang on. I'm doing double duty here. Sorry about that. There should be a link that says shanman.tips/ask your podcast question. It should be the very first link when you see it in the description of this particular video. So do me a favor and go ahead and head on down there and ask that question. I have the spreadsheet up right now where I have a series of about 9 or 10 questions with like multiple parts. And so we'll kind of work it from there. So again, go ahead. Let me know who you are in the chat and let me know where you are chatting from. And then, of course, submit your question. Now, if you have questions or if you want to just have conversation within the chat itself, you're more than welcome to do that. I'm very free flowing. I'm very easygoing. And I would prefer that you guys start building, community amongst each other so that we can kind of get to this. So listen, I also love to read comments. So if you've ever checked out one of my live feeds for my radio station live feeds on Facebook, which I think you can go to my Facebook page. You can find that. You see, I do live feeds, and they're a lot more fast than that. Okay, so I see Mrs. Suarez is here, and Mrs. Suarez, I believe I have one of your questions that I think I have 3 of your questions that I'll be answering today for you. So we'll be doing that. So hi, Mrs. Suarez, not a mama. Thank you so much, and I'm glad that the microphone sounds great. Doesn't sound like it's coming from my computer, so it's from my microphone itself. So we'll just kind of keep it from there. We'll keep it going from there. Let's see here. I see Lennox Addo from London. So hello, London. Thank you so much for tuning in on this. Well, today is Wednesday, so I would imagine you're really late right now. It's probably close to midnight. If not, you're already into Thursday. So thank you so much for tuning in. Neanderthal podcast from Kansas City. Long-form, you have a podcast, a long-form conversation with a variety of guests. The best podcast is KC. It's also on YouTube. Okay. And let's see. You're from Sebastian, Florida, not a mama. Like I said last week, Florida is a hotbed for podcasting. Ryan Medina, who wanted to show up last week into this particular live feed, he was not able to make it. I believe he said that he had to work and he saw me go live. So that was kind of that was an unfortunate thing that he had to do, but that's a cool either way. And let's see here. So Ryan, you're out there from Boston. Thank you so much. It's about 7:00 in Boston. I know that. Ottawa, Canada. Thank you, Mike Henley, for joining. I really appreciate it. And Jay King from Canada. So we have a couple of Canadians here. Bayberg from London. So I've got a couple people from London. Lennox Addo and Bayberg are from London. And we got Rob Saunders from San Antonio. So it's good to see all of you guys. So here's how it's going to work today. First of all, I'm going to be asking you a couple of call to action things within the video. First of all, I want to ask you to go ahead and like this video. If you not like this video right now, go ahead and do it. What the like button does, or the thumbs up button on the stream, it helps this stream get into the other feeds for people who you are connected to. So it's all part of search engine optimization, and that's just one of the things that I like to do is I like to get the thumbs up. So leave thumbs up on these. And then after the feed, I'm going to ask you guys to leave comments, because that's equally as important in the YouTube videos, not just the comments here on the chat, but the actual comments below the video. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and leave comments as well. And those of you who are just joining in, go ahead and leave your name and where you're chatting from, and we'll go ahead and do that. And if you have a question, there is a link down in the description so that you can go ahead and do that. So first, I'm going to go over some things about growing your podcast. So how I want to work, I'm thinking these live feeds, I want to start out with a piece of content that I want to share with you that will be valuable and helpful and help you grow. And maybe you've heard the pieces of content that I'm talking about already. Maybe you just need them to be reiterated. Maybe you just need them to be heard again so that you can implement them. And I think it's important that you hear things multiple times. And what I will ask you to do within your podcast is I will ask you to create the element and the behavior of repetition within your own programming. So I'm a practitioner of my own words. At least I try to be. And I want people to go ahead and utilize these practices that I'm exhibiting on these particular live feeds so that you can take them back with you on your podcast and start utilizing them. And don't think that just because you use them once, that doesn't work. You have to use them multiple times. And the reason why I'm asking you to use them multiple times is because this is something that in radio that we do all the time. We base things off of repetition. So if you've ever heard, I know you guys have heard like maybe talk show hosts, or maybe you've heard music. It doesn't matter. But you may have heard things over and over. You may have heard the same song over and over. You may have heard the same promotion or the promo over and over and over. You may have heard the same concert announcement over and over and over. You may have heard the same charity event over and over and over. That's all done intentionally, and those are all part of campaigns and flights. Flights being a part of a campaign is very similar to what you would hear inside of, say, like a MailChimp campaign, an email marketing campaign. And there's something that's just very similar in radio. And that's what I want you guys to start doing here. Okay. So I will be practicing the same things in these particular live feeds. So what I will do is I will share a piece of content out with you. I don't know. I'm going to try maybe go for about 15 minutes and then we'll move forward. Okay. But today we're going to really be talking about growing your podcast. And I just scribbled down a couple of notes here, and you'll see me jumping into my notes here. And, it's a little more free flowing than my normal produced videos. So you're going to see the flaws, you're going to hear all that, and that's what's going to happen in your podcast as well. So today we're talking all about growing your podcast and what you can do to grow your podcast. Likely you're at the point in your podcast where maybe you have leveled up or you're plateaued out, and you just can't figure out a way to get more people to come into your podcast. Now, in the comments or in the actual chat itself, tell me what your biggest struggle is right now with your podcast. And I want to hear all about it. If it's about growing the podcast, which part of growing the podcast is it that you're having difficulty with? Because I want to help you with that. All right. And maybe I will answer some of those questions for you. All right. So when I say, tell me what the biggest part or the biggest problem is, try to get a little more in depth than just tell me, I'm having a hard time just promoting. What is it about the promoting that is the difficult part? What is it about the marketing that is the difficult part? And I see a lot of people already saying, marketing is the biggest problem. The marketing is the hardest part. So hopefully I can give you some tips and some hints. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds on this because it does take more time to actually talk and show the steps of the marketing, but I will hopefully give you some tips and push you into that direction. Okay. So today I have 6 steps, or I have actually 6 tips that I want to share with you today. And I wrote them in no particular order, even though I think some of them should be in a particular order. Okay. So the first thing that I have written down here is for number 1, for growing your podcast, is you got to be leading your listeners to one place where they can connect with you. And what I mean by that is, where are they able to connect with you? Where are they able to reach out to you? Where are they more than likely going to be able to connect with you on, a guaranteed basis, really? So as you guys know, and as you guys see here on YouTube, you can connect with me here, but I don't consider this my primary source of connecting with people. In fact, this is probably my secondary or tertiary source of connecting with people. And this is all part of the marketing questions that you guys all have. YouTube, And when I'm jumping on Twitter, sometimes whenever I'm on Instagram, if you've ever checked out my social channels, you see that I'm available. And I probably should be doing a little bit more, maybe promoting more about podcasting, but I promote more about my radio station stuff because that's where my audience is. That's who my audience really is. And so I try to cater my content towards them. So I have areas in which I will push my content out to those people. So if you ever checked my Instagram, I'm sharing content out about the radio station. Maybe I'm at a concert and I'm on stage and I'm taking a picture from stage out into the crowd so that I can post it out onto social media. I always let my listeners know on the radio how they can find me. So if we were to take this kind of in an alternate step or maybe in a parallel step, the radio is another way people can reach out to me, but radio is maybe it's the secondary way they can reach out to me. They think it's the primary way, but it's really the secondary way. The primary way for me is really having someone on an email list, because that is a guarantee for me to make sure that I am able to connect with these people at any given time. All right. So these people who are reaching out to me, or I reach out to them on the radio, or whether I'm in a podcast or whether I'm on YouTube, what I am planning on doing is I'm planning on pulling them into my orbit. You've heard me talk about this in previous episodes or previous YouTube videos. I talk about bringing someone into my orbit. And how I do that is I'm always pushing on my podcast, on the radio, on my YouTube. Go check out my Instagram. Go check out my Twitter. Go check out my YouTube channel. Go check out my Facebook. Now, Facebook for me happens to be the one channel that is really, really good for me, but it's still not the primary source. And the reason why I say it's not the primary source is because each one of these social media channels, you do not own the data. You do not own the content. You own the content to a degree. What I'm talking about is you don't own the data. You don't own the names. You don't own the email addresses. These platforms can go away at any given time. And what you're going to hear a lot from marketers, and what you're going to hear a lot from people who know how to market really well, is that you should be building an email list, because an email list is the primary source for you to connect with your listener. Now, before you tell me that it seems like a spammy idea and it seems like you're just getting emails, it is not spam if you're doing it right. If you're on my email list, you likely see that whenever you opt into my email list, I just share nothing but value to you. You've probably seen this, right? So that's where I ask you that you have to really start focusing on putting into your mind that you have to start this email list, all right? Because these other channels will all drive back to your email list. So number one is lead your listeners to one place they can connect with you. A guaranteed connection is on an email list. So those email platforms can be MailChimp, Aweber. It could be, I use Kajabi, but there's many different ones. And I believe MailChimp is still free for up to a certain point. It's something that you really should be considering, because if you're wanting to market your podcast, you're looking to really get the word out about your podcast in any form possible. Email, social media. It could be, if maybe you wanted to do it, direct mail. Maybe you wanted to run ads. These are all multiple channels in which you can start marketing your podcast to certain people. Okay. So let's jump into number two. And if you have questions, again, there should be a link down in the description of this particular video that I want you to go ahead and click on, and you can ask the question down there. I see that Lennox has added a couple in there, and Parker and Bear have added a couple, or has added a question in there too. So there's a link down in the description that you can go ahead and do this. And don't forget to share this this live feed onto your Twitter using the share button on YouTube as well. All right. So number two, let's talk about how is your consistency on your podcast. And when I talk about consistency, are you creating regular content every week at the same time and releasing it at the same time? A lot of podcasters don't think that this is a big deal. They just kind of release whenever they feel like it. They go, oh yeah, I'm just going to release it on Monday at 2 p.m. And then maybe I'll think about releasing another one on Thursday at 7 p.m. Let's do one on Friday at 11 a.m. And it's just an inconsistent schedule. And we have to remember that as human beings, we are all creatures of habit. We have to remember this, because I know that I have my habits in the morning. And let's think about the habits that you have in the morning. And what are the habits that you do in the morning? Do you get your cup of coffee the first thing in the morning? Maybe the first thing you do in the morning is you do a stretch. Maybe the first thing you do in the morning is you take a shower. And what are the habits that happen after that? Is it taking a shower and listening to a podcast? Or is it doing a stretch and listening to a meditation? Is it cooking breakfast and watching the news? You have to remember your habits. So this is a very crucial and critical key to the growth of your podcast. It comes from not only a behavioral standpoint, but it comes from an algorithmic standpoint as well. So you have to remember that when you are creating the behaviors for your listeners, to know that there's going to be a podcast that's going to be released on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Like clockwork, they will continue to download. Now, does it mean they will be anxious to be downloading the podcast? No, but they will know that it is always there at 10 a.m. They know that podcast will always be waiting for them. Okay. So you as the podcaster have to be more diligent about being more consistent with that. Now, algorithmically, when it comes down to this, when you start seeing this, and I've seen this with my own podcast, and I've seen it with podcasts that I have delivered. I've delivered podcasts where they have been more sporadic, and I have delivered podcasts where they're more consistent. The ones that are consistent are mine. They're mainly mine. I have one client that is pretty consistent. Actually, she is very consistent. She's kind of a type A personality. So she's like, I got to have this out on Tuesdays at 7 a.m. So, or I'm sorry, not 7 a.m. She has to have them out at 3 a.m. So when someone wakes up, the podcast is waiting for them right there. So I've seen where an inconsistent podcast doesn't see growth. It just the statistics on it just show spikes. They're just like little baby spikes, and they're just kind of inconsistent. But you will see with a consistent podcast over time, you will see if you continue to not only deliver it consistently, but deliver value within the podcast, you will see it not only spike, but you'll see the spikes growing up, and they'll grow up, and they'll grow up, and you'll see the growth of your podcast over time. And you just got to keep moving at it every day. Just remember that you're taking baby steps with every podcast that you're creating. And with every one of those podcast baby steps, you are going to be growing the show, and you're going to be training the algorithm to know that your podcast is going to be showing up every time at that same time. And you're just creating those behaviors for your audience as well. Okay. Number 3, let's talk about referencing previous episodes. Now, something that we do in radio is we always do these things just basically, for in layman's terms, or I guess in basic terms and not industry terms, we do these callbacks, and air quotes, they're callbacks. And we always talk about whatever assets that we want to promote. All right. And the assets maybe we have a merch store that we want to promote back, or maybe we have a show that we want to promote. This could be maybe promotion, but I've always done callbacks as well with content that I've already created on the radio station by utilizing short links to saying it to my audience, saying, if I were to jump on the radio and say, like, the Big Red Radio 98K UPD, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. It's a Shan, man. And, did you hear that Godsmack is coming back through town? I did a really cool interview with Sully from Godsmack. In fact, you can find that on our website at 98kupd.com/ and then, of course, it'll be like the extension will be something really simple. In your podcast, it's very, very, very smart to do some of those things. Say in the beginning of your podcast, when you're promoting, you're kind of getting people warmed up into the podcast, and you're telling them, hey, we're about ready to get started. So let's think about, like, hey, if you want to explore other episodes that I have done, you might want to check these out. And of course, you can kind of sprinkle those in. Now, there is a little bit more of a method to it. I'm just telling you kind of right now to just go do it, to get used to start doing it. But what I would recommend that you do is that you place it in your podcast at the same place every time, so that you can build a behavior. What you have to remember in your podcast is everything is all about behavior, listening behavior. Radio has figured this out so much over the course of the years, and everyone always says radio is going to die, podcasting is going to take over. But one thing that I think is really interesting is that podcasting and radio have a lot to learn from each other. So we have to take some of those elements of radio and pull them into podcasting, and take the elements of podcasting and push them into radio. And that's what I try to do every night on my particular radio program, is that I'm trying to push people to content on our website. In the same sense, I'm trying to push people from the content onto the radio. So everything is working back and forth. So it could be the same for you when you're utilizing your social media channels. You promote on your podcast to go to your Instagram or go to your email address, but on your Instagram, you're promoting people to make sure that they come onto your email list. You see what I'm saying? You're trying to cross promote everything at every turn, so that you're pulling people into the universe every single step of the way. Okay. But one thing that I want to really kind of reiterate and kind of hammer home on this is the importance of short links. All right. Now, tell me in the comments or in the chat, what type of website platform do you have? Do you have WordPress? Do you have Squarespace? Do you have a Wix? I don't think anyone here has a Kajabi, but let me know in the chat what type of website you have. Now, likely there's most of you who have most of you have a WordPress website, and so that is going to be the most common one. And you're going to be using multiple plugins for that. One thing I want to remind you of, and I'm going to tell you this right now. I am a WordPress. I wouldn't say I'm not a WordPress expert, but I would say that I'm a WordPress amateur. I don't know coding, but I know enough to really, really be dangerous. And I did a lot of WordPress stuff back about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I was really heavy into WordPress and learning how to get into the nitty gritty, and I was learning coding, but I was still on an amateur level. And I soon started to learn that plugins, that if I was installing multiple plugins on my website, that I was slowing down my website terribly, and it was not making the load times very, very easy. But one of the plugins that I recommend that you use is something called PrettyLink. If you've not gotten PrettyLink, I recommend that you do that. Now, here is the example that I will use for you. Say, for example, it was that example where I was talking about Godsmack in my interview with Sully Erna. And I said, go to 98kupd.com/ and then it would be a short link to that. So it could be like episode 1, all right, or EP1. So you could go on the air, or you can go on your podcast and say, hey, if you haven't checked out that interview, make sure you head on over to my website, theshanman.com/ EP36, and you can hear that interview I did with, Jason Richardson. So even though there isn't a link like that, but that's just as an example. Cross promote your content. That's the best way to get people to start learning more about you. I mean, you want them to know, like, and trust you based off the content that you're creating. All right. Do me a favor. If you have just joined me right now on this live feed, go ahead, like the live feed, share it out onto your Twitter feed, and we will continue with the questions. I got a couple more here, and then I'll get to your questions. I see Ryan has said, I have a website. Parker and Bear talking with Reckless. Oh, I see Reckless is here, so it's good to see Reckless Gamer. Audio Mac and YouTube also. You must be having a conversation. Squarespace. I see Squarespace in there too. Okay, very cool. Bayberg, Godsmack, when, where will they do a drum battle? Yeah, the drum battle is pretty cool by Godsmack as well. All right, number 4. Well, I talked about email list building, so we can kind of fold that into number 1. Let's talk about, I guess, number 5 then. Number 5 is building a community. Have you thought about building a community on Facebook? I know there's people out there who really do not like the idea of Facebook, but I will tell you this right now. This is the hottest thing happening right now in the social space, is building an actual community of people that can reach out to you. And the reason why I say this is, and this is something that I have known for quite some time, when you build a community on Facebook, if you ever noticed the content that you post out onto Facebook, the content only gets shared out and delivered to a small percentage of people within your newsfeed. Now, if you're someone like me who's got like a ton of people who are, liking my page and following, I think only like 3% or 5%. I don't know what the number is, but it's a very small percentage of people who actually see the posts that I am creating. And the only time that they ever get to see the creation of any pieces of content that I create is when I go live on Facebook. All right. And it also helps that I'm promoting on the radio. Hey, go check out my live feed when I'm doing my live feed at the same time. So I'm doing a simulcast, right? So I'm growing my audience at the same time. But what I learned over the course of doing this was that people weren't seeing the live feed, and I wasn't able to connect with them on a deeper level. Like, I would love to connect with a lot of you guys on a much deeper level by creating a Facebook group. Now, there's a reason why I haven't created a Facebook group for this particular community, because I have other plans for it. But this is something that I've actually been testing out within my own radio station audience. And I currently have a group of supporters right now who actually do pay a contribution of $5 a month because they're so passionate about what we do. Now, do you have to create a paid community for your podcast? You don't have to. It can be a private community, and people can come in and get on your email list. And then, of course, they can jump into the Facebook group, and you can communicate with them that way. But what I have learned is that it almost builds its own community. The group that I have currently with my radio station audience, they have actually built every piece of the marketing around it. Right now, they're calling it the Shan Clan family, which is funny. And within those contributions, what I am utilizing those contributions for is I'm putting it back into the community itself by checking out things like, deals on Sticker Mule, and I'm creating promotional content. Now, I might be going a little ahead of myself for you on this, and this is something that I can talk about way, way, way later on down the line, but that's just an idea where you can do that. In the beginning, maybe you just start a community in the beginning, because the posts that show up in Facebook for groups are shown a lot more. So that's the real key here, is that normal newsfeed posts don't show up as much. Facebook group posts show up guaranteed based on your settings inside the Facebook group. So that's something that you need to think about when it comes down to promoting your podcast and marketing it. And let's jump into number 6. All right. And I've kind of talked about this a little bit. I have written here, building in calls to actions into your programming. So this means that you would have to prepare a reason or a means for people to jump onto your email list so that they can be primed and ready to be a part of your group or your community. So think about it this way. You have to set all of these things up. One of the things that I see, I don't want to sound like I'm bashing on podcasters, because, and I don't want to sound as though I'm being too blunt, but I will say this: most podcasters are lazy. They just are. They're mostly lazy. And I hate saying that, but it is true. When we have the tools available to us and we have the skills in order to use those tools, it's kind of like either use it or you lose it. And why not just use the tools that are available for you? Get someone on an email list, build out an email marketing campaign, build out a Facebook group, build out an Instagram page where it's specific towards your niche. We have the tools, but if you don't use it, you'll lose it. There's an actual, I'm not religious by any means, but I do believe that the Bible is a very good source of knowledge and wisdom. There is a story about a parable. I think it's called the parable of the talents or something like that. And it talks about how these three wise men, or I guess 3 individuals, were given talents, and one person didn't use the talent, and the talent was taken away from him and given to someone else who was actually utilizing it. So utilize your talents, utilize what you already know, and build it into what you're creating. This is all part of the marketing wheel that we are talking about with your podcast. Now, I will later down the line, I will walk you through the step-by-step processes of how to do that. But for right now, I need you to start doing the research on your own, looking into it on your own. And then I will walk you through those steps as we continue to do more of these live office hours for all of you guys. So I hope this content has at least maybe opened your eyes to a little bit more, or maybe has started to get you to think a little more about growing your podcast and where you should be taking your content to the next level. I'm going to be addressing some of the content here today, or some of the questions here today. And I go into Twitter a lot and I check a lot of the hashtags based on people who are doing podcasting, and there's just so much struggle. And if podcasters just invested in themselves just a little more, they could do a lot more for themselves. All right. So I'm going to leave it at that. That's going to be today's, I guess, first 15, 20 minutes, I guess, of it's probably like a half hour, but that's going to be the first part of that. And now we can go ahead and jump into Q&A, and we'll answer some questions. I will go to some of your guys' comments here. I see a lot of comments coming in, which is very, very awesome. Don't forget to go ahead and leave a comment. But if you have a question, leave it in the link that is in the description of this particular video. You're free to do that. I have all of those opened up right now. I will go ahead and start with some of the latest questions here in a second. I'll go ahead and read some comments first, then we'll jump into some questions. Let me get some water. Totally raw, and I hope you guys don't mind it being raw. Let's see here. I see Parker and Bear. I've used Jimdo for years. You're able to have a free site. Let's see. I only have a Libsyn. How do I create one? A website, which is what I'm assuming from you, Mrs. Suarez. I saw someone here. I think it's Not a Mama has Kajabi. Yeah, I have a Facebook group for my podcast and building a paid one on Kajabi. Yes. So Not a Mama has got the right idea, especially if she's built an audience. If you've built your audience, you know what you're doing. And if you want to try out Kajabi, I will have a link in the description here after the live feed that you can check out. All right. So you can do like a 15-day free trial. But let me just put it this way. If you create a website and you're using WordPress and you need to implement multiple services like MailChimp, and you need to add in like a membership service, you need to add in a Zapier service, you need to add in all these services, it's going to cost you just about the same amount as if you were to use Kajabi. That's just what it is. Let's see here. Paintbrush and Dice podcast. It's modest, but growing little by little. Well, that's a good thing. That is definitely a good thing. Let's see here. I wrote something that might help, a Chrome browser plugin that helps you when to post. Okay, so it's good to see that you guys are communicating back and forth. Let me jump into some questions here, and I will jump in to the first one here from Ryan. And Ryan asks, what is the sweet spot for starting podcast length? So what I'm going to assume is what you mean is what is the sweet spot length for a podcast? I will give you the answer that just about every other podcaster who is successful will tell you. It's what length do you want to make it? And it's not necessarily based around that they don't know. It's what are you comfortable with doing? And one of the common things I think with most podcasters when it comes down to how long should my podcast be, I think it's a matter of like, how much is the podcaster willing to prepare to create content for that particular podcast? I've seen podcasts that are really successful that are 10 minutes. There was a voiceover podcast many years ago that I used to follow. They were only 10 minutes long, and it ended up winning all these awards for like best podcast because it was jam-packed in 10 minutes with value. So think about this when it comes down to it. How much content and value do you want to give your audience? Ryan, in the chat, if you're still here, go ahead and leave. What is your podcast about? And then maybe I can like elaborate a little bit more about that. But let me also tell you this. Edison Research and Triton Digital did a survey about a year ago, and I don't think it's really changed all that much, but I do know that the number has grown in terms of length and how long people listen to a podcast. And the length for a podcast that people will listen to is about 55 minutes. So close to an hour is how long someone is willing to listen to a podcast. So you got to think about the content that you're going to be creating. And when it comes down to creating the content, when I create my community, I want to be able to share the secrets and the tips and the tricks of creating content so that you aren't just like stepping on this wheel and feeling like, oh gosh, what do I come up with today? That because I've fallen into that trap as well. And so I will teach you how to do that later on down the line. But the sweet spot, make it for what it is, but just know that those numbers for Triton Digital and Edison Research say 55 minutes. I think it was 53, 55. I could be wrong. The number could be like an hour and 6 now. I don't know. But the number is increasing for sure. All right. Thank you for that question, Ryan. Jay King, let's see. He asks, I'm using Libsyn and RSS feed, linked to the main places, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play. Hang on, dang it. Let me see here. It's not wrapping my text. Let me make sure that I can read the entire question here. Okay, here we go. I'm using Libsyn and the RSS feed linked to my main places, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, etc. Which one makes sense to promote more come launch time? So I will tell you this right now. The main sources of let's put it this way. The places where podcasts are being consumed the most are on Apple Podcasts, which is iTunes. It's now called Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Spotify's jumped into the game. So I would have people listen on those two platforms. But ultimately, if you have a website, what I would be doing is I would strategically be pushing people to my website with those particular blog posts in individual episodes so that people can start getting used to listening to your podcast. Now, you can have cross-promotion links to your iTunes and, of course, your Spotify. But if you have to do it, absolutely, you could push them to iTunes and Spotify, but you're also available on Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn. I would recommend that you put yourself on TuneIn or iHeartMedia as well. So those are things that I think you really need to do that for sure. TuneIn is a great way for you to show up on an Alexa device. All right. So if you're on TuneIn, you can be on an Alexa device. You just say, Alexa, play my favorite podcast, whatever the name of the podcast is. And then, of course, it will find it. It'll say, sure, playing this podcast on TuneIn Radio. So you want to make sure that you're putting it on TuneIn Radio. Okay. Let's see. And I'm going to go back to Ryan's question because he has said, what's the sweet spot for starting length of a podcast? He says, my podcast is about writing. They usually last 15 to 20 minutes to cover my topics, and they always outline my podcast. So stay on and cover all the points I want. Okay. So I would say 15 to 20 minutes is good. In fact, you know what I think, Ryan? I think you could probably extend that podcast out to 20 to 30 to 40 minutes. I think you can really, really do a lot more within 30 to 40 minutes by providing better content. It's not saying that it's not saying that you don't have great content, but I think when I say better content, I say more valuable content. So I would have to hear your podcast, and I would have to evaluate your podcast and see where we can make improvements, and then see if you can implement them and put them in onto your podcast itself. All right. Let's see here. Thanks, Shannon. You just made me go crazy. I made you go crazy. I'm sorry if I made you go crazy. I didn't mean to make that happen. My Alexa started playing Shan. Hi, Alexa. Sorry about that. Let's see. Can I just do that as a joke for all of you guys and just start calling out her name and then have her start talking to you guys? I'll just have her say, hey, shut down, and then see what happens. So, okay. Let's see. All right. So I hope I answered your question, Jay King. I hope that helps out. Lennox, who is in London, he says, I haven't a website. Could I gather and build an email list from a Facebook? Yeah, of course. I think you can definitely do that. I have seen businesses and I've seen podcasts where they didn't have a website right away and they just started collecting emails. And with the cool thing with MailChimp is that they give you landing pages that you can create. Now, if you're using something like Not a Mama and like myself, like Kajabi, they make the landing pages more friendly. And of course, the deliverability of the emails are a lot better with Kajabi. So that's just something that you need to think about when it comes down to it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you really are just starting out and you want to dip your toes in the water, MailChimp and their landing pages are a great opportunity for you to start collecting emails. All right. And he also has a second question. I'm not sure what hosted platforms to go to for my podcast. Could you provide a list for me to do further research? So I'm going to tell you this right now, Lennox. I have a podcast to do checklist of everything that you would need to start your podcast from. It's basically a launch checklist. That link is down in the description below. If you want to go ahead and check it out, it is available for you on my website. If you're looking for equipment, there's also an equipment guide list. So just below this video, it will take you directly to my website, and it has all those links. It tells you exactly where you need to be putting your podcast. It tells you the steps and the order in which you need to launch different pieces of your podcast before you even go live. Okay. Let's see here. Parker and Bear, do you have a favorite microphone and or app for podcasting on a smartphone? Honestly, I don't really like to use the phone, but if I had to say I had a favorite microphone, it would be honestly the onboard microphone on your phone. I mean, I just think it's the best thing that you can use. I've done interviews on my phone like this with rock stars in concert venues, and it's come out a little hard to hear, but with a little bit of post-production, it comes out great. I have used lavalier mics to record into the phone, but it has a really, really loud noise floor. And I think if you get a Rode lavalier mic, it's a little bit better. But what you're experiencing with a lavalier mic is you're experiencing distance like this. You're hearing it a little more at a distance because the microphone, it may be on your chest, but it's a little more at a distance, and you don't have that control to get into the microphone. So if you've ever noticed on these live videos, or if you ever noticed me, if you've ever watched a live feed of me on Facebook, I do get into the microphone, and I also talk to the side of the microphone. There's so many haters on YouTube that say I use the microphone wrong, and they say that I should be using the microphone this way. But if you use it this way, you can hear me popping into the microphone. But if I use it this way, you don't hear me popping into the microphone. All my P's and T's, and my B's, they all surpass the microphone, and they go beyond the microphone. They don't go directly into the microphone, as you can hear. It does sound like it's a lot clearer, but I have more effectiveness and deliverability this way without hearing that annoying pop. All right. So there is no real app. I would say just use, If you use an app, let me see here. There's an app called, I don't know what type of phone you have, but I have an app called Voice Recorder for iPhone. But just the standard phone recorder on your Android device or your iPhone will do. And then you can just export it out and then edit it in your audio editing software, your digital audio editing software. Okay. I hope that answers your question. Let's go to Elijah. And some of these questions, they were released or they were delivered yesterday. So whether these people are here or not, is just kind of, I don't know if it's kind of one of those things, I guess, is, if they're here, they're here. If they're not, but it's still content that I could deliver to you guys. He asks, how do I make it so that my inhalations aren't so loud? Because I talk a lot and sometimes talk too much, but just have to inhale deeply. And I'm also a mouth breather because of my allergies. Well, I will say this. I don't like saying that any type of physical thing that I've got going on is going to affect the sound of my podcast, because I think that's just something you got to get over in your head. I do realize that people have allergies, they have speech impediments. I get that, but I believe that you can utilize those things to your advantage. But people will understand that you maybe have those types of. I don't like to say they're deficiencies. They are unique features of yourself. Something that I do believe that podcasters do not do enough of is they do not give themselves enough praise for the uniqueness of who they are. So when it comes down to the question, how do I make my inhalations so they're not so loud? You'll hear me inhale on this microphone all the time. What we have to remember is that podcasting is kind of like a form of radio, depending on the type of podcasting you're creating. You can create a storytelling podcast, and that might create a little bit more of an element where it's like an audiobook. And you would have to go in and you would have to edit out all of those breaths, just like you would do with an audiobook. But when you're doing something that's kind of like radio, I just leave the inhalations in. As far as the inhalations are concerned, maybe you back off the microphone a little bit. You have to really utilize the microphone for what it is. Microphone technique is not something that is learned or even known or even talked about. There's voiceover artists that talk about microphone technique. But what I think is important is that you know how to use the microphone. You know which direction you use the microphone. You know how to jump into the microphone and talk into the microphone if it's too loud. And you know that if it's too loud, you come out off the microphone. You got to learn how to use the microphone. You got to learn how to balance yourself out physically in the environment so that you can utilize the microphone best to the ability that it is. It's a tool more than anything else. It's not an amplification. It's not for amplification. It's just to deliver your voice. That's all it's doing. Okay. Just remember, it's all for delivering your content. Let's see here. That was from Elijah. Let's go to Kaylee. Kaylee, this is actually a question that she submitted on the comments on my page, but she asked a question specific to the mixing board that I have. So before I get to that, let me jump in on you're Elijah. Okay, there you go, Elijah. I see you. Reckless Gamer. Let's see. My alien art life is good to see you. Where are you coming from tonight? Let's see. I like the lack of a pop. Yes. So let me get a little bit deeper into this pop thing. Okay. There's a lot of podcasters out there that say you have to have a pop filter. And as you can see, I don't even use a pop filter. I don't even use a pop filter on the radio. Pop filters are mainly used for, they're for vocals when you're recording music or voiceovers. And when I say voiceovers, like professional voiceovers for commercials, for audiobooks. We're doing radio here. If you're asking me, we're doing just strict radio. I don't need a pop filter. There are some radio jocks that do need the pop filter. Sometimes they get the pop filter and they put it on top of the microphone and they think that it changes everything, but their microphone technique is so horrible that they're still talking into the microphone, popping into the microphone. And it just, like, what's the point of having that if you're not going to use microphone technique? So you don't really need a pop filter. You just need to learn how to use the microphone. That's it. All right. Let's see. Paintbrush and Dice podcast. I would love for you to listen to one of my podcast episodes and critique. Well, maybe that's something later down the line I can provide when I build out my community, and then I can get a little deeper into the weeds with you guys and help you grow, because I think that's the most important thing. I want to see people grow and see them excel in the areas in which they are struggling. Okay. And Jay King saying, thanks for the advice. You're very, very welcome. Paintbrush and Dice podcast. You didn't submit it in the form, which is okay, but I'll answer it right here. What about SoundCloud? And I'm going to assume that you're asking about whether or not you should use SoundCloud. I particularly am not a fan of SoundCloud, and these are the reasons why. When I first got serious about trying this new concept podcast that I had called Be the Experience, I first went with SoundCloud. And when I went with SoundCloud, everyone just kept telling me, you need to go to Libsyn, you need to use Blueberry. And I had used Blueberry in the past, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to try SoundCloud so that I can see what it's like, so that I can at least test whether or not it's worthy of being used. And at the time when I signed on to SoundCloud, I'm not even joking, I signed on to SoundCloud, and then like a week later, I get this email in my inbox saying that SoundCloud is on the verge of shutting down because SoundCloud hasn't figured out a way to really monetize. They are doing monetization models on their platform, but they are not investing it heavily into podcasting. It's mainly for musicians. All right. You can utilize it for podcasting, but what you're not getting with SoundCloud is all of the metadata fields that you would need to fill in so that your podcast can show up in iTunes, or I'm sorry, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, all that appropriately. And then what if you want to update the episode? Maybe you made a mistake in editing and you're like, oh, I need to take that out and I need to replace it with something else. They don't offer that opportunity for you to do that. You have to re-upload a brand new episode. With something like Libsyn, you can upload an episode, and let's say you make a mistake in the actual episode and you're like, you said someone's name wrong, or you gave a wrong call to action, or let's say this, maybe you created a call to action inside of the podcast for a different promotion, and you're on this campaign where you're promoting older episodes. You can upload new episodes without losing any of the search engine optimization results by uploading a fresh episode. You're just basically replacing a new episode with the old episode with a new episode without changing anything, without having to make it brand new, without nothing. It's just something that is going to be always there. I hope that makes sense. So you're not ruining any of the juice that is going to that particular podcast episode. All right. So that's the one thing that I think most podcasters really need to realize, is that when you're deleting podcasts, you lose all of the interaction that goes with that. That I get. It's funny because so many haters on my YouTube channel, they say, you made a mistake on the YouTube video. You did a typo in the YouTube video. And I'm just like, I don't care at this point. And the reason I don't care is because I cannot replace the video. I can't make that fix because I've already driven traffic to the YouTube video. And if I delete it, why does someone want to go back to the same video? I want to catch them on the first view. And I want to get that SEO juice. That's very important. Exactly the same importance with your podcast. All right. I got to get a drink of water here. Hang on real quick. Sorry. Excuse me. No pop filter. Let's see here. You're welcome, Paintbrush and Dice. Let's see. Hi, Warren Keith. I haven't answered your question. I'm coming up on your question here real shortly. I see that you just popped in. Yeah, and Warren does make a good point. SoundCloud does have a lot of spam profiles, and it's annoying. It's so annoying. Libsyn is just much better. It's a lot easier. Okay, so if you've not liked this video, which I know a lot of you guys have liked, go ahead and like it. I really appreciate it. And then, of course, I'm going to ask you guys to leave comments on the actual video itself, not in the chat, but in the comment section, because that helps this video get into the ears or in front of more people on YouTube. As we continue to do more office hours, and once I build out my community for you guys, I will really get into the weeds about how you can use YouTube to your advantage as a podcaster. This is something that is huge. It is the biggest secret that I have been keeping. And I want to share it with you guys, but not in this public forum, because I think that you guys who are serious about podcasting deserve to learn about it in a different forum. Okay. So I have this whole secret that we'll get into a little bit later. Let's see here. Mrs. Suarez, if you're still here, I'm coming up on your question, but I want to answer a question from Katie Borkland. She asked the question yesterday on my YouTube channel. Can you use USB microphones with a Yamaha MG10XU mixer or any mixing board? So you cannot use USB microphones on a mixing board, especially the Yamaha MG10XU. USBs clearly have a different plug, and you just can't plug them in. But as you can see here, I have the Blue Yeti Pro. This is a USB and an XLR capable, and it plugs into the mixing board itself. So that's just something that you should consider. All right. Her second half of the question says, do you have any recommendations for a cheaper mixer with at least 3 microphone inputs? So the answer to that question is that most mixing boards come with 2 or 4 inputs if you're trying to stay on the more affordable end. This goes for Yamaha, Behringer, Mackie, any other ones. There's other mixing boards or mixing consoles that people say, oh, it's got 3 knobs. And I'm like, oh, that's just not enough if you're looking for quality sound. It costs the same amount of money, but it doesn't have quality. And I just say, get into the Yamaha, because it's going to give you, it has an actual mixer. I mean, you can adjust highs, lows. I mean, if you can hear right here, you can hear that I'm adjusting the lows, the mids. You can hear that I'm adjusting everything. Everything sounds, I can create whatever I want with this particular mixing board. So the sound is that rich sound is all based off of this mixing board. And I, of course, do a little bit of post-production in Adobe Audition too. All right. Mrs. Suarez, you asked some really great questions that were awesome. They were just so awesome that I'm hoping that they help people out in this particular live feed for you guys. All right. So let's see here. It says, well, number one question, and I have a video on this, Mrs. Suarez. I think you did comment on my video about this, but we'll go ahead and answer it here anyway. You ask, how do you deal with negative comments in a professional way, especially when they are disrespecting the guest? Well, quite honestly, this is something that happens to me in my Facebook live feeds. And quite honestly, I give these people a warning, one chance warning. And I say, hey, if you're going to be talking that way, just beware. Like, if I think that you're being rude, I'm just going to block you. We're just going to start a block party. And if people start getting rude, I just start blocking them. And so you have to remember that you have the power when you're doing a live feed, especially if it's a video, or you have the power to block them on Instagram, Twitter. If they're being rude, the way I look at it is that if they are not willing to respect your guest or you, if they're disrespecting your guest, they're disrespecting you. And I have no problem blocking them. That's not someone you want in your audience or your universe. What you want are people who are passionate about the topic that you're talking about, so that you can deliver value every single time to those people, okay? The second question she has is, when you are allowing the guest to share their truth on a subject or controversy and you want to remain neutral, is it okay for the podcaster to say, quote, that's right, correct, I understand? Or what should be the correct way to do that? It's completely okay to agree with them. What you have to remember is that when you have a guest sharing their truth, or it's something that's based around controversy, what's great about you as the podcaster is that you're really more or less like a devil's advocate, and you're trying to see the issue from both sides. So you can challenge your guest and say, well, what if, you bring it up this particular way, but what if someone doesn't want to do it this way? What would you say to them? Always pose a question back to your guest that will make them think, or hopefully get them to think outside the box. So you have every opportunity to challenge them or agree with them. It doesn't necessarily that you do agree with them, but maybe you're just confirming that you hear what they're saying. So that's just something that you might want to think about. And Mrs. Suarez, your third question, I'm allowing for all parties that are in favor or opposed on a subject, and her topic is regatta sailboat, to give their opinions so the leadership can know what the people really think. And now people are trying to tell the podcaster how he should conduct his interviews. Well, here's the great part about you being the podcaster, is that it's your show and you get to do it the way you want. However, I will tell you this right now. It is important for you as the podcaster to listen to that feedback. You can take pieces of feedback from people and say, well, maybe if I did implement that into my podcast, or I implemented that strategy into my podcast, or what they're recommending, then maybe that's something that you want to do. But if they're telling you how to run your program, you have the option to decide whether or not it's good for you or not. You have to remember, you're the one paying for the hosting. You're the one paying for the website. You're the one paying for the equipment. You're the one that is fronting all the money for all of the things that you are creating. And it's good to take that feedback, but remember, it's ultimately your show. You are the creator of this content, and you will find an audience that will come in and they will latch on to what you have to say if the value is there for them. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Warren Keith saying, great questions, Mrs. Suarez. Elijah saying, Reckless Gamer, does anyone recommend having guests all the time, or should I have some episode where it's just me and my co-host? Reckless Gamer, can you put that in the or actually in the link down on below this video? Can you put that in the actual form so that I don't forget that? Because I'm going to go up on these comments here. Bayberg, Rode has a podcaster-oriented board. Yes, the Rodecaster Pro. What's funny about the Rodecaster Pro is that I think it's a wonderful board. I think it's an incredible board because it's basically everything that I have at the radio station, and it does just about everything that a radio station can do. However, I think it's a wildly overpriced piece of equipment for the basic podcaster who's looking to do something. Okay, now if you're looking to live mix music into it, it's a wonderful piece of equipment, and maybe you're creating sort of shortcuts for that. But a lot of podcasters like to go in and they like to edit their podcasts in Audacity or Adobe Audition, and that is something that I think is a practice that's going to continue going on because live mixing is very difficult. I live mix every day, and I know how to live mix, so it's easy for me. But for someone that's average that doesn't understand live mixing, it's very, very difficult. So if they're willing to make that investment in whatever, it's like what I can't remember how much that board is, like $400 to $500, or maybe it's $600. I can't remember. If they're willing to make that investment and learn, then yes, it's good for them because they're making that investment. But if you're an average podcaster, you could just really go with a Yamaha mixing board and a microphone and some software, and you'd be good. Let's see here. Eric asks, hey, let me see. Hey, Shan, I'm using Adobe Audition for my podcast. Would you recommend any other software, or is Audition one of the best? Audition is actually one of the best. I mean, if you want to use Pro Tools, you can use Pro Tools, but Audition has so many shortcuts that I've mentioned this in previous podcast or maybe previous videos that it takes me about 15 minutes to edit a podcast episode. That's an hour long. I mean, if you know the shortcuts. And so I don't know how long it's taking you to edit your podcast, but I know for me, it's all based in the philosophy, and that's something I can discuss when I jump in and I create my my community. Let's see here. Hey, Greggy, what's up? Hey, Greggy, how are you? Thank you for showing up. And if you haven't liked this video, make sure you like it right here on YouTube. Let's see here. You say traveling with a Zoom H6, which I have had one of those, and they are wonderful pieces of equipment. Would you suggest traveling with extra microphones? Any other suggested gear? Yeah, I mean, well, it just depends, I guess, kind of on your purpose. If you're going to be interviewing people on the road, and you're going to be sitting down, say, like in a hotel lobby, it's always good to have an extra microphone or a third microphone. The ATR 2100 is probably a good microphone that you can use. I understand that you would be using a lot of XLR cables if you're on the road, but you just have to kind of figure it out for yourself and figure out what's going to fit best for you as far as the purposes of your, I guess, travel schedule. That might be the best way to kind of gauge that. I know that if it were me, I would probably be taking 3 microphones, and I would be using, I would have 4 XLR cables because one XLR cable always burns out. So that's something that I always have. With your Zoom H6, I would also have extra SD cards just in case, because the Zoom H6, as you know, records in WAV files, and they're massive, massive files. And when you go in to edit them, you have to mix them down to MP3 and compress them. So I would have extra SD cards and get the maximum. I don't know if they make SD cards that jump up to like a terabyte at all. I don't know, but I would get the most amount of gigabytes that's possible to record my episodes, because those episodes are recorded in WAV file. I hope that answers your question, Greggy. My brother's name is Greg, by the way. All right, let's see here. Okay, I'm going to answer Elijah's question. We're going to come back to that real quick. Elijah, who is the Reckless Gamer. Let me do this real quick. My wrap. He says, do you recommend having guests all the time, or should I have someone with me and my co-host? Because a thing that is kind of hard to do is to find a guest with the small following and viewership per episode. So a couple of things that you can do when it comes down to your to developing your podcast, you would really, really need to plan ahead. That's the most important thing I think you're going to have to do is plan ahead. It is hard to get guests to come in and do a podcast episode with you. You have to plan ahead. People have schedules. People are very busy. It's hard for them to come in all the time. Like my schedule is always very, very limited because I'm always building out something on my website, or I'm working with my Facebook group that I've built out as well. And I'm working on building out product. So that's another thing that I can get into another topic. Maybe next week we talk about that. I don't know, but building product and building monetization sources for yourself. So, people are always busy when it comes down to it. Is it okay to do a solo podcast? Yes, as long as you're delivering value. And when I'm talking about delivering value, a lot of gamers, I think, they like to just go on and they just like to talk. And they talk about their experiences. Well, what they don't realize is that a lot of their experiences is the value, right? So what is it about you and your gaming podcast, or what is it about you and your sports podcast, what it is about you and your fishing podcast that you can teach someone else? I remember when I was a kid, and I remember when Nintendo, the first console ever came out, and then Nintendo Power, the magazine, came out. And it was the way in which you could learn how to advance further and deeper into The Legend of Zelda, or go further in Super Mario 3 and find the hidden levels. And with that, there were interviews from other gamers who were talking about how they discovered these different levels. So utilize your podcast as a means of value and structure it to where each podcast covers one particular topic, and you can dive deep into that and talk about experiences and what you did. So this is where we start seeing the focus of our podcast, and we start focusing as opposed to just kind of going off the cuff on our podcast. Now we're creating focus within our podcast, and that is what's going to help us grow the podcast, because you got to think about it from the listener standpoint. If a listener goes, wow, I didn't know that, or wow, I've done that, but I've never done it from that perspective, that's a way for you to deliver value and have someone come back. I hope that answers your question. Let's see here. Tapiwa. And forgive me if I say your name wrong. I used to be a high school English teacher, and one of my biggest pet peeves was that I got someone's name wrong. So forgive me if I got your name wrong. Okay. Let's see. We're going to go for a little bit longer, and then I got to jump off. Steve Benning is here. Steve, how's it going, man? Steve is out of Flagstaff, Arizona, and I'm in Arizona, and we know a lot of people here. I ran into Steve last year. It's been 1 year since I seen you, Steve, when I was at that festival in Flagstaff. So it's good to see you. Let's see here. I see Parker and Bear. Hindenburg Journalist is another fantastic dog for a podcast. Yes, I've heard Hindenburg is great. I'm just not so into. I just haven't used Hindenburg. I have nothing bad to say about it, because I've used Adobe Audition since it was Cool Edit Pro, and we're talking like 20 years. So that's all I've really known. So let's see. I got to get another drink of water here. Let me look at the questions here. Oh yeah, by the way, Shannon, I love watching your videos. I sometimes reply unintentionally because it feels like a one-on-one conversation between you and me. Well, I don't mind responding back to you, but just know that whenever you do comment, that your comments are helping other podcasters. I get thousands of hits on my videos every day. And so I know people are hitting the comments and seeing what they have to say. Just think about how your behavior is whenever you're delivering content or you're researching content on YouTube. You go into the comments and see what people have to say, because sometimes the answer is there. So that's why I always tell people, answer questions inside of the, ask the questions inside of the comments, because I may answer, or maybe someone else answers it. And I think Elijah had someone answer a question for him yesterday. Maybe it was you, Elijah. So that's just something to think about. Let me get a drink of water here. You have to remember, here in Arizona, it's not as hot where Steve Benning is, but it is 100 and let me see here. I'm looking at my Google device. It's 101 right now. And normally in June, it's like 117 at this time. So I'm kind of glad that it's just 100 degrees, but it's getting warm in my bedroom right now. Let's see here. Mrs. Suarez. Sorry, you might have answered this question, but I'm translating this to my husband. Is Audacity good for recording audio? Yeah, I think it's a good, it's a good platform to record audio. I don't know Audacity enough. I have played with it. I just didn't like the way the workflows were. And I know you can create workflows, but I know in Adobe Audition, the workflows are a lot faster if you just know how to do that. And I know that people get intimidated by Adobe Audition, but if I were to just give you kind of a taste of what I do in Adobe Audition, I mean, I have a training course on this that's on my website, but if it's a taste of what's going on in Adobe Audition, I record my piece of audio. That's my podcast. And I save it to my hard drive. And then on the backside is a multi-track that's already set up as a template. And all I have to do is just drag my podcast into that template, and then my podcast is done. It's got all the professional elements to it that sounds like a little more like it's professional, like it came off the radio. Some podcasters don't like that. They just like the music and they just like an intro. Whereas me, I like something sounding a little bit more radio. That's just my style. And I think that fits my style because I am on the radio. But you can create different elements inside of Adobe Audition that will make your podcast sound more professional with those branding elements. That's something that I think is very important. And maybe when I decide to start my community, that I dive deeper into creating those elements, because a lot of the time we ask someone else to do those things for us. We say we need to find someone who will develop those things for us, but it's going to cost money. And typically when you ask someone to create those things, it can cost anywhere between $300 to $500, because that's what I would charge. And that's basically what the market is doing. But what I would do is I would say, like, let's all jump in. We come into a community and I would teach you how to do that. Or maybe I would say, like, I give you a discount on a training course where it's way, way cheaper and you just learn how to do it that way, so that you don't have to go hire someone. In fact, when you develop and build on that skill, just like I said earlier in the live feed, when you develop a skill, you now need to utilize it. You either use it or you lose it. And what you could do is you could also have your podcast where you develop those elements, what they would call sweepers or bumpers, that makes it sound professional. But you could also go out and market yourself as someone who knows how to create those and charge that amount of money. That's just something to think about, okay? Let's see here. Elijah says, I'm talking about verbally or whatever. I'm not sure if I understood. I'm sorry here. Do I find a guess? Let me see if I can figure out your question here. Or did I miss something, Elijah? Reach out to me on email, Elijah, and maybe I can answer that question a little bit better for you. Okay. I'm sorry if I misunderstood you. Let's see here. Mrs. Suarez, I use Audacity to record my podcast. It works great for me. I have a budget that fits my budget. Let's see. Europe will be melting in temperature. I heard that you guys in Europe, you guys are hitting like 100 degrees, whatever that is in Celsius, but I hear that it's getting really, really crazy hot over there. Let's see here. Oh, your mom always laughs. Oh, you're talking about the comments. I think that's what you're talking about, Elijah. Okay. Tell your mom I said hi. All right, it's time to answer. I'm going to answer one. Let's see. I got a couple more questions. Maybe I'll save these for later. Warren, I think if Warren Keith is still here, I have questions that I want to answer from him. So he has a question, and I'm sorry if you're not here, Warren, but I'm answering it right now, okay? Warren Keith asks in two separate questions. I've been posting audiograms of my podcast on Instagram, which has netted me quite a few followers on Instagram. However, the majority of followers are mostly podcast influencers that have their own decent following. Is this the kind of following a good type to have in the beginning? Any way to turn that following into listeners so that more than influencers? Okay, so what Warren is asking here is he's saying, I am promoting with audiograms on Instagram, and I'm mainly getting podcast influencers who are following my podcast. All right. Now, Warren, okay, good thing you're still here, Warren. I'm sorry I waited so last minute to get to your question. Warren, what is your podcast about? Put it in the comment, because I want to see where I can maybe help you dive into another area on Instagram that will help you grow in another area. So just leave that in the comments. But here's what I would say in terms of this question, okay? If you're promoting something on Instagram with an audiogram, and I've got a video on audiograms, just go to this YouTube channel on the main page, and once we're done with this live feed, and you will see that I have created videos where I talk about developing audiograms for Instagram and Twitter and all that, all right? So if you're creating an audiogram for Instagram, and you're creating the caption for the audiogram itself, we have to think about what are the hashtags we are using for that particular Instagram post. So one thing that I learned a long time ago when Instagram was first the thing, and I know the algorithm has changed a little bit, but not too much. What I had learned back in the day was that I was learning how to photography on my phone. And I did this thing called a 30-day photo challenge. And within the photo challenge that was on, I found it on Instagram in the Explore tab somehow. I don't know how. I think the girl I was dating at the time had me get into this as well. We found the hashtags that matched the photo challenge. So we would do this photo challenge, and when we tapped on the hashtag, if you're familiar with that, you tap on a hashtag in Instagram, it'll take you to all the images that are tagged with that hashtag, right? So if you're tagging your audiogram with podcasting or podcaster, then you're likely going to find other podcasters that are going to go in there. And there are also bots inside of Instagram that are following all the time. And that's something that these podcasters cannot do. It goes against the rules and guidelines of Instagram, but they'll have these bots follow your account all the time. So when you're tagging podcaster or podcasting or podcast life, anything like that, what ends up happening is that these podcast influencers start following you, okay? And if they're not engaging with the content, I just don't like, I actually, what I do is I go in and I block them, and then I'll block them, and then it says this user has been blocked, and then I'll go in and unblock them so that it's, they can still come in and block if they're a legit source that wants to come in and learn more about what I'm talking about. But I unblock them because a lot of these are bots, but I can tell when they're bots, all right? Typically, it's like some Russian bride that wants you to it's just weird stuff that comes up and you're like, oh, it's like, or maybe it's a porno site and you're just like, oh my gosh. So you got it. I block them sometimes, or sometimes I'll block and unblock them because they're just not really engaging with my content. All right. So let's see here. So to finish answering that question, let's see here. So it's all based in the hashtags. Remember that it's based in the hashtags. So how do you get more people to follow your podcast? So let's talk about it this way. When you build out an audiogram and your audiogram talks about a specific topic, your hashtags should reflect that topic. So let's say your podcast is all about gaming, but let's say within the gaming niche that you're talking, maybe you guys kind of run off on a tangent about sports, and maybe it's about LeBron James. You could tag LeBron James in that because that will put that in that hashtag category when someone looks at it. Now, your audiogram should also be visually appealing so that people can know what they're talking about. All right. So if you can, make sure you're putting the captions on those audiograms, and make sure you're putting a title on the audiogram as well, title of what that audiogram is all about. So do that, and that hopefully will maybe get people to start coming in. You don't want necessarily the podcasters, even though it's still good to have those podcasters. Maybe you can reach out to those podcasters and you can say, hey, can you come on my podcast if they're within the niche? Or maybe you figure out a way to work with them. But make sure that you're tagging the topic of the Instagram within the hashtags itself. All right. So that's just one way to do that. Okay. I hope Warren, I hope that helps you out, Warren. His second question was, what are your thoughts about Podbean? I have nothing wrong with Podbean particularly. The way I look at it right now is that it goes, as far as my favorite platforms are concerned, it will be Libsyn, Blueberry, Spreaker, and then it would probably be Podbean. So that's the order in which it would go. Okay. Reckless Gamer, my email is info@theshanman.com. Just go to, I think it's on my YouTube about section. So you can do that. Ryan retracted a message. How did you do that? Greggy, let's see here. Hey, Greggy, how do you handle a guest who pulls away or wants to take the podcast down months or years later for some unknown reason, or wants to change the stance on the show? Well, you got to remember this, Greggy. You got to remember that you're the host, and your guest should never control your interview. You have to control the interview. So if they want to jump down a path where they're talking about something that just is not even relatable, you can use phrases like saying, okay, I want to stop you right there because I want to come back to this topic of how we learned how you started your own business and built six figures, because they may go down this real long path. You have the control over the interview. So you have to reel them in. You have to ask them, okay, stop right there. And it's not that you're saying it like rudely. You're just saying, I want to stop right there because you bring up some great points, because they likely may have brought up great points. You bring up some great points, but Let's go back to this topic, that my original question. You'll hear interviewers talk about a lot about this all the time. And Greggy, I don't know if you're from the United States or if you're from overseas, but I know that on talk show hosts, they tend to do that. They'll ask someone a question, and then the guest will go down a path, and then the talk show host will say, "Well, I want to come back to this point, and let's kind of dive deeper." You can get some really great answers if you do something like that. Okay. Oh, you're from the United States. So here's a really good one, Greg. So I would say that look at, and whether you like them or not, but I like to look at these guys as great examples of interviewers, regardless of where they stand personally or philosophically. I look at guys like Stephen Colbert, Howard Stern. I don't look too much at Jimmy Fallon because he asks a lot of softball questions and they're just very easy. I like to see guys ask questions. I mean, I would even say go in and look at news organizations, whether you're looking at MSNBC, Fox News, or CNN, and just pay attention to how they deliver the question. And you'll see how they deliver the question. You know who does it really well are the political commentators. Just watch how they ask a question. They'll ask a question, and sometimes they'll do it one of two ways, okay? They'll ask a question, someone will answer it, but they won't answer the question. And typically with politicians, they always answer a question that's like, it's always spun. But you'll see some of the good ones. And I'm not saying they're great interviews, but how they ask that question or really latch on and say, but you didn't answer the question. I want to know, what is the answer to this question? Let's dive deep. I want to get into a deep dive about this. And then they'll really get that guest to answer that question. So look at political interviewers, look at late night talk show hosts, look at morning show on radio. Those guys all know how to get answers out of their guests when the guest tends to go off on a tangent. Okay. Let's see. Warren Keith, why is your message retracted? I don't know why that's like that, Warren. That makes me want to cry. All right, let's see. Okay, we're going to see if there's any other questions. I'm going to answer them, but if not, I'm going to jump off here in a second. You guys have been great. Thank you so much for sticking around on the office hours for today. It's just been amazing. If there's something you want me to talk about next week, I recommend that you go down into the comment section and ask a question in that link that says shanman.tips/ask a podcast question. Leave a question down there. And then next week when I do this, I can ask a question. And I'm not even sure that I will go an hour next week. Maybe I will go an hour. I anticipated only going 40 minutes today, but here I am at an hour and 16 minutes. So that's good for me. So let's see, what do we got? Oh, you can do the three dots, Ryan is saying. Okay. This is your me time. I'm glad, Mrs. Suarez. Ultimately, what I would like to do is that when I do start a community, I would love to do these still for you guys, but I would taking the deep dives and where they're more how-tos and getting you guys moving forward in the right direction. I would love to do those more like on a Zoom call and bring you guys on in either on a phone call or on the camera, so you're not having to type it all out, because I know typing it out or expressing yourself can be a little bit more difficult. So let's see here. Hey, Greggy. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to implement that. This is great information that I needed. Thank you, Shannon. Deep dive is a great phrase to use, and I'm going to follow more of the Colbert and Stern. Yes. You know what? Here's something you might want to look at, Greggy. There is a video on YouTube right now with Anderson Cooper and Howard Stern. And I was going to make a video on this and talk about how you get your guests to talk about, how you get your guests to reveal more information. And there's this really good interview with Anderson Cooper and Howard Stern, based off of Howard Stern's new book. And Anderson Cooper asks him, how did you get Donald Trump to say certain things? And it's not necessarily anything political. It's more about a behavior. And what I talk about a lot here is it's all behavior. It's all behavior when it comes down to it. And he talks about how he makes his guests more comfortable. And in the case of Donald Trump, he makes Donald Trump feel more comfortable in the interview so that he shows him respect, and he shows him shows that he respects him and that he wants him to be on the show. And this somehow gets him to open up even more. And when you go back and you hear that interview with Stern and Anderson Cooper, he really kind of reveals his secret on how he gets people to open up. So it's not necessarily something that is more about politics. It's more about the psychology of getting someone to open up and the behavior. So we have to remember that when we interview someone, it's about behaviors and psychology. And when I'm sitting here and I'm talking just to a camera, which seems so funny, I feel like I am talking to you guys, but it seems so funny. I understand that the psychology is that you are on the other end of this camera and you're watching what I had to say. And I'm trying to connect with you on a different level. I'm trying to connect with you by delivering value. I'm trying to connect with you by delivering a little more personality, and so that you get to know me a little bit better. And I think that's what's important with your podcast. You want to connect with your audience. Try to make your podcast to where you are connecting. You're talking to your audience, and you're not talking generally to them. So you don't say, you guys. Say, hey, you guys, what's going on? Even though I do that, I try to not practice that, but I say, hey, you guys. Instead, in your podcast, say, hey, how's it going? Thank you so much for joining me today on this week's podcast. I know what you're thinking right now. You're probably thinking, how do I lose the extra 10 pounds? And you're probably thinking to yourself, I do all the work. I do the cardio. I do the weight training. I'm eating right. But what is it that's not helping me lose the last 10 pounds? Well, I want to cover that for you so we can get you moving forward. So you see that I'm using you. And I'm using you, or I'm being more personal with you. Okay. So that's something that I think is very, very important. Okay. Let's see here. Not a mama. I'll make you VIP. Are you kidding me? You're Kajabi family. Let's see. Ryan, thanks, Shaman. There was so much good info. I appreciate it, Ryan. I appreciate it very much, my friend. I just want to help people grow and get beyond a lot of this stuff because I know it's difficult. There's groups on Facebook. If you're in a group on Facebook, you can go ahead and share this feed out. But, I just know there's a lot of podcasters. There's a ton of podcasters that just, I read the comments or I read their posts and I'm just like, oh no, you're making it so much harder on yourself right now. Let's see here. Warren Keith. Sorry, my 4-year-old is going crazy. LOL. My podcast is going through transition since I dropped my co-host. It was about 2 friends from different backgrounds growing up in America. That's actually a really cool podcast. That would be a really cool podcast. But now, since you're going through a transition, I'm sure that you're trying to reevaluate where to go with it. That's something that's interesting. I mean, you could definitely continue with the podcast and just say, this is where the podcast is going. This is what ended up happening. I dropped, you don't have to say like I dropped 2 of the guests, but I'm going through a transition period and this is what is happening. We discuss current events and try to come up with tips that help get by that. I understand that. I totally understand that. So hard. Yeah, I know, Warren. So that's why I want to start a community and maybe we do Zoom calls instead so you can come in and really explain it. Because I know sometimes whenever someone explains it and other people on the other end, they are there, they will, they tend to, it makes their wheels turn on inside their head. All right. So hard to explain through typing. Yeah. Not a mama, Shaman. Let's start a book club and video watch parties. Yeah, on Facebook we could do that. Rob Saunders, learn something every time. Muchas gracias. Okay, before we go, I want one thing that I want you guys to do. One thing for me. We got to do this. Okay, and I love to do this. I want you to grab your phone right now. I want you to grab your phone, and I want you to take a picture. If you're watching on mobile, that's just take a screenshot of what you're watching. But if you're watching on a computer, I'm going to go ahead and take a picture of you guys, and I want you to tweet it at me. My Twitter handle, I'll write my Twitter handle in here, is here. That is my Twitter handle. You guys may follow me on Twitter, all right? I'm going to take a picture of you guys right now, and let's just take a picture of me taking a picture of you. All right, here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3. And you get to see my did you see my sweaty pits? Oh my gosh, it's horrible. It's hot in this room. That's why I'm sweating right now. It's so hot. I will send this out on Twitter right now. But tweet it at me, your photo, and we'll go ahead and I'll retweet you guys out. Okay. So we're going to leave it at that. I see my friend Elizabeth Zawalski just showed up. This is for my daughter. She's trying to do makeup stuff. I want to take one more picture. I'm going to take one more picture. Take another picture of me without my sweaty pits, if you can. There we go. All right. Thanks, Shannon. Black shirt hid the sweaty pits. I hope so, man. It is so hot in here. Let's see here. My thermometer in my room says it's 83 degrees right now. So it's hot in my room right now. Well, it's warm. Let's see here. Elizabeth, this is for my daughter. She's trying to do makeup stuff. Would podcasting or having just a YouTube channel be better? For her, I think a YouTube channel would be better. I probably would be asked. I am going into a how do I say this? I want to do a deep dive on utilizing YouTube to leverage a podcast, but I also want to be able to do a deep dive on leveraging YouTube and how to do a deep dive on that as well, too. Okay. Reckless Gamer, thanks, Shannon, making this 15-year-old's dream come true. All right, let's get on top of it, Elijah. J King, this is definitely full of value. I appreciate you doing that. Elizabeth, I will talk to you in the members group. Just for you guys who know, Elizabeth is in my my Shanman Clan, Shan Clan fam group. And so she follows me and has been following me for many years. So she is proof that starting something like a community can be, fruitful in a sense. So Elizabeth is someone who has come and shown up for me all the time. Give your Google a refresh. I asked one there. Oh, you did? You asked one more question? I could do one more question. Let's see here. Is that what you're asking? Let's see here. Lennox. Oh, I have two more. Okay, tell you what. I will do three more questions. And then I'm out. Okay. Bayerberg. Pregnant pauses and awkward silence. How to differentiate between and how many one-liners to have to fill in. So I'm guessing you're asking, like, what is the difference between a pregnant pause and an awkward silence? I think it's to me, this is not me being snarky. It's just, I think it's kind of an obvious thing, but I do know when pregnant pauses come, it's more whenever it's at an emotional high. All right. Or maybe an emotional low, and you can create pregnant pauses. And I've done this on the radio. Elizabeth has heard me on the radio do pregnant pauses. And typically when I do pregnant pauses, it's typically like over the years when I've heard rock stars die, like when, in the case of like the rock realm, and you might know, Bayerberg, when Vinnie Paul died, I had to deliver that news on the radio, and I had to say it was something similar to like, I went on the radio. I said, the Big Red Radio 98K UPD. That's the latest one from Hell Yeah. And some very bad news came down today that Vinnie Paul has passed away at the age of whatever his age was. And no one knows what the prognosis of what his death was. So it's just very unfortunate that he had to pass away. We wish him nothing but the best. So you kind of got to get a little more emotional when you do it. It just depends on the situation. When it's an awkward pause and it just sounds awkward, it's like, it's just really, really long, and then a really weird answer comes out. That's when I would go in and I'd do an edit and trim out. Okay. Lennox Addo, one last question for me, please. Thumbnail graphics, any suggestion of how to get and create one? Tell you what, Lennox, I would love to answer that question. I think it's going to be a little more in depth and in detail. So I will save that one for next week if you can make it, and I will answer that for next week. And let me see, Paintbrush and Dice podcast. I would like to learn more about SEO for my podcast. Any advice? Let's answer that question for next week. If you can come back, Paintbrush and Dice, I would really appreciate it. And I would love it if you guys would share this out. And if you have other podcast friends, make sure and let them know that I am on this channel. I'm going to keep trying to do these live feeds for you guys. An hour and 27 minutes is the longest I've ever done a live feed. So this is kind of crazy. All right. All right, friends, I'm out of my way. Thanks, Shannon. I know it's total sauna in here. Eric, literally just finished my podcast episode watching this. Awesome. Glad to hear that, man. Bearberg, I feel like we have a lot in common. So, okay, guys, have a great rest of your evening, day, wherever you are. Make sure you comment on this particular video in the comment section, not on the chat, but in the comment below the video. Let me know what you thought of the video and whether it was helpful, and I'll get back to you so we can help push the video up into the feed for SEO purposes. That will help out tremendously for me. It means so much for me. Any interaction you guys can give me on these videos means so much in terms of SEO juice. And that's what we'll talk about next week. Paintbrush and Dice. We'll talk about SEO for your podcast. All right. In the meantime, Ryan Medina, Reckless Gamer, Elizabeth, you're awesome. I love you. You're incredible. Mrs. Suarez, buenas noches for you. Have a good night, and we will talk to you guys next week, 4:30 p.m. around the same time. And we'll see. Maybe only be 40 minutes, but I don't know. Knowing you guys asking great questions, we'll see where we can go. In the meantime, have a great Wednesday. We'll talk to you guys soon. See ya. Oh, and reach out to me on Twitter too. You know how to reach out to me. See you guys.